I'm from Pennsylvania. I work for Good Street Care. I'm a general foreman, climber. I run our safety and training. And I've been climbing for 12, 13 years now. And I've been climbing a stationary rope system for 7 years now, basically since the beginning of Kevin Bingham's concept. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Hello. Hi everyone, I'm Marcus. I'm from the south of England, and I've been an arborist for too long. 23 years, I think. Been climbing SRT, DRT, that's what I'm calling it by the way, because SRS and MRS sucks as an acronym. So we're going to call it that. So SRT rather, is stationary rope technique. DRT is what I would call dynamic rope technique. But the old school system of a 2-to-1, sliding across a knot or a blades hitch or a hitch climber or any doubled rope type device up and down a rope. So yeah, we're going to run through various setups, various systems for accessing a tree. This is our tree. At some point we're going to have to assume it's a different tree for different reasons to access it in a different way. So for instance, if there were no low branches here, how would you get up to the top of the tree if you couldn't chuck a rope over a low branch? So we'll show you a bunch of systems, bunch of methods, and kind of how we go about appraising a tree and getting up into it safely.
Yeah, so just a quick show of hands. How many guys have climbed on an SRS, a stationary rope system? Is that your primary system you climb on? Nope, you use a combination of both. So great, we're going to touch on both. Guys still climbing on Blake's or taut line? Yeah, very viable. Some of the companies I work for up here, those are how most of their guys climb. They do a lot of crane work, so for them it's just really quick to untie and retie that monkey's fist. Nothing wrong with that. So we're going to run through a bunch of different systems and setups and go over why we use them, how we use them, and under what scenarios we use them, and stuff like that. So yeah, so the first part is why we're going to use these climbing systems. Why would we choose an SRS, a stationary rope system? There's a ton of different reasons. One of the ones for me is that I don't have to isolate a line, and I can back up my system right away, and that's just simply for access. That's not even about working the tree. So that would be one reason I would go with a stationary line system.
Yeah, I've got to say it's very unlikely that I would climb any tree on double rope system, i.e. chucking a rope over a branch, chucking a rope over the branch, and chucking a rope over the branch, up and up and up. I've kind of given up on that. First thing I would do typically is reach for the throw line, get a high anchor point, and usually set up SRT system and just walk up a rope. It literally is a ladder, to walk up a long ladder that comes out of the bag and isn't really big and aluminium and in the way. So it's really quite simple, using foot ascenders to get up in there. But very often I'll switch back to double rope systems for working a crown. I just find it easier manoeuvring around a crown on double rope systems. So there isn't necessarily a switch to SRT. You needn't think, oh, I've got to do this now, this is all I can do. It's a tool in the box. So we're talking about a tool in your mental box, a method that you should know and understand, but also you need a few bits of essential equipment to make it work well for you. And there are lots of different types of equipment, lots of different ways people like to do things. So it's a question of finding which one suits you the best. But yeah, for me, I'll always go up on SRT because I'm old and things hurt. So that's the way for me to get up.
Yeah, so talking about some of the advantages and disadvantages of every system. Every system has a pros and a cons. So some of the advantage of a double rope system when using it is it's very simple to advance. We've all been there, monkey fisting up a tree, or just advancing your tie-in point is very simple with a double rope system. Not quite as easy with an SRS system, though fairly similar in its approach, whether it be a basal anchor or a canopy anchor. Canopy anchor, it's probably the exact same. when we talk about pros and cons, one of the biggest ones, like when they're talking about crane work, anybody climb SRT with crane work, I don't think I saw anybody raise their hand. And I've tried it, and it's very cumbersome, and it takes a lot of time. And we're all about efficiency, and that's what makes the job flow and go quicker. And so I'm looking for the most efficient way to do something possible. And quite often, well, in crane work, that is the most efficient way, a doubled rope system. In pruning aspect, I find an SRS, stationary rope system, to be the most efficient system. And so we're looking at those pros and cons and weighing them for whatever work we're doing, whether it be removal, whether it be pruning. Does it allow us to tie into a separate tree and work from there? Or are we going to be changing our tie-in point a lot? And that might change what system I'm going to be using. The shape of the tree itself is going to change the system that I use. Whether it looks like there's a real faulty lead where I feel like I need to back myself up. That's the reason why I use a stationary system. Because it's easy to back them up, which is something that's a little bit more difficult to do in a doubled rope system. Everybody with me so far on this? No heads are nodding. Everybody's lost. Falling asleep after lunch. It's all right. So why else would you use a doubled rope system?
For me personally, I just like to, particularly out on branches, I find there's a lot of time lost to setting up redirects sometimes, and that you've got a top anchor point. If you've got a clear run to your branch that you can just whiz down, get out on it and double, and you can pull on a rope and you find a reaction on your saddle that you're pulling and advancing. And when you're on SRT, for me, only because I maybe haven't got my head around doing that particular manoeuvre, but you kind of just got a solid static rope that's not really doing anything. So you're pulling, and it's very visual. You're pulling and advancing, you're tending your slack, but you'll kind of end up tiptoeing along the branch and balancing on the branch a bit. Whereas with double, you can kind of lean back on it a bit more and sort of pull and thrust forward, and advance along the branch much easier. But principally just for the time it takes to swing across, set a redirect that, yeah, redirects are great and very useful for positioning yourself above a branch. The less angle you've got on your rope, the safer and better it will be in terms of your work position. So to be able to set a redirect above and come down onto the branch you're working on is very advantageous. And it's often harder on doubled rope to do that. Certainly with SRT, you can, because the rope's not moving, it's not going up and down, it's sort of put it where you put it, and you yourself are moving up and down the rope on a system. You can sort of tie it off there, come down, do your thing, go back up, untie it, go back in. Whereas on double, if you go past a few branches, suddenly you've got a bunch of friction and you're not really going anywhere and life's horrid. So it's nice to have the advantage of knowing both systems and pick the one that's going to work out in that particular job and occasion.
So he touched on basically the two biggest differences between a moving system and a stationary system. And that's in a doubled rope system. When you pull, you're pulling half your weight. It's basically a 2-to-1 type system. So if you're doing a lot of pulling and thrusting, that might be the easier system for you. Where in a single line system for ascent, a stationary system for ascent, you're getting the full advantage of a 1-to-1. So every step I take, whether that's 2 foot, 3 foot, 1 foot, I move that far. In a doubled rope system, I have to pull twice the amount of rope to move that distance. So I got to pull 2 feet to move every one. So that's a pro and a con. When coming in on a limb walk, guys find it that a big advantage to be able to pull half their weight and tend like he's talking about. When I was climbing doubled rope, I'd find that to come in from a limb walk, I'd be grabbing both parts and pulling myself in. So I was losing that whole advantage. So it was really easy for me to switch over to a stationary rope system. And then the other big difference is controlling friction. In a doubled rope moving system, that's always it. How are you managing your friction? We use pulleys and friction savers to manage it at our tie-in point. When we get to redirects, we're using pulleys, different methods to do it there. Otherwise, we're doing natural crotch where there could be a lot of friction gain. In in a stationary type system, your system is creating your system. Yeah, your system is creating the friction. So you have a controlled amount of friction in this little area that you can control, and that's where the advantage of using redirects comes into play. And he touched on something interesting as well, is that it's not always an advantage to use a redirect. Sometimes it's just quicker to run out, do your work, and come back in. I was finding, for me, that a lot of the pruning work that I did, which is where a lot of the advantages I find for a stationary system come into play, is that I was doing a lot of end weight reduction. So I was spending a lot of time on the outer canopy of a tree. So to be able to set up a redirect where I'm already halfway out every limb was a huge advantage. Instead of having to work from the base of the tree out to the end of a limb, I'm starting halfway out a limb and working out. So I gain a lot of efficiency in that redirect. And then I change the whole way I break down a tree. In a doubled rope system, I create a tie-in point, and I'm working different parts of that area coming down, and then I'll maybe change my tie-in point. In SRS, I was following a column, a good central tie-in point that would access points of the tree, and then I'm just looking for a redirect that gets me to an area, and I'd work a whole column all the way to the ground, go back up, retrieve, move to a second column. So a tree like this, I'd say, all right, the backside isn't going to have a lot of work, but that allows me to access the rest of the tree. And then if a lot of my work's going to be on the outside, which our sales guys would sell this as an end weight reduction type tree, that means most of my time is going to be spent on the outer canopy. So one redirect, even though I might have to do something, is going to be a huge advantage, because for every limb I'm working maybe a 10-foot section instead of a 35-foot section to get out to the tips. So I can make better cuts, be in better work positioning, and just be more efficient all around. Which saves energy as I go on throughout my day. Yeah. So that was the advantages for me moving to a stationary system. We're moving through this pretty quick. Is there any questions as we go along? It's basic yet? Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, one other consideration for SRT access is I had a job where I had to stare in holes looking for bats and wildlife on massive oak trees. Rather than go all the way up the middle of the tree, come all the way out to that branch and look in that hole, I was able, because I'm quite smug, to throw a throw line up through a fork about where the hole was, managed to get it through a fork up there and back down, base tie it, and just simply climb the 20 feet to that hole. It saved a whole bunch of time. It was a big old tree, it would have been lovely to climb, but we haven't got time because there's another 400 to do, so up you go and job done. Another one worth mentioning was we had a pine tree with a very large limb that had failed, but it was hung up and hadn't fallen out. It was in a rear garden, so there wasn't any, rear yard, English. So there was no way of getting up the tree or getting machinery to it or anything like that. So what we decided to do is, rather than send a climber up beneath that branch, because it wouldn't pull out, and even if it did, we'd probably end up with a huge, hideous tear down the main stem, which wouldn't be nice. But rather than send a climber up beneath it, we set the high line up above it, tied that line off on a figure of 8 descender, sent the climber up diagonally, and once he was above that dangerous branch, able to lower him off so that he was in a normal SRT position where he could carry on up, get a good anchor point, come down and deal with the branch. But the point was that he could move up a stationary diagonal rope, and at no time was he underneath the branch that could have fallen out any second, even though we'd all swung on it and it didn't. But it was a judgment on, okay, what can we do, problem solve, what's the safest way to attack this, and then just, crack on and do it. Come up with a plan, because you've got this toolbox in your head of systems that you can use to make it a safer day, and that's what counts.
Okay, so starting on working a tree like this, the first thing we got to do is set a line. So in a traditional system, in a doubled rope system, we have to isolate the line. Pick a tie-in point and isolate the line. So this is a fairly thick tree, so that could take some time. So the one advantage of stationary rope system is that you don't have to isolate your line anymore. You can throw through multiple unions, back yourself up. I'd still emphasize that you need clean ropes. I've seen guys take this concept, they'll stand back, throw a rope, just take whatever they hit and start pulling rope up. And I've seen some really scary tie-in points from it that I really wouldn't be comfortable with. So it's still important to be able to spot what you're throwing into and clean the ropes up, even though they're not isolated. You want to be able to see what you're tied into. And this has saved me a number of times. I took one of Mark's classes a number of years ago, and I learned a way to tie in to go up on 2 static lines with my system already tied in at the top. And I was doing this on a pine tree in New Jersey, and I started going up, was about 20 feet up, and all of a sudden the limb I was tied into just gave out from under me. It was a thick pine tree, I couldn't really see what I was tied into. Must have been too far out on a limb, and I just fell to the next limb. I maybe took like a 4-foot fall till the next limb caught me, and kept chugging right on up like nothing happened, so my guys weren't scared. But without that, if I had it isolated in a union, I would have went the whole way to the ground. It would have been like a 25, 30-foot fall. Probably would have hurt. Probably wouldn't have bounced. But so that would be one reason to choose a stationary rope, is that you can back yourself up. So I've already set this rope here, and you can see it's up there a little ways, nothing I'd feel unsafe on, but it's not isolated at all. And I would actually go as far as say, if you're using a basal anchor, extra forces can come into play. You can get as high as doubling the forces on the tie-in point. So that's something we need to keep in mind. And there was a climber in our area that, he was a bigger guy, he was like 230, and he had set up in an ash tree, basal anchored, was chugging on up, got to about 50 feet, and the limb failed on him. And unfortunately, he was isolated on that limb, so he went the whole way to the ground. Really busted himself up, took about 8 months for him to get back in the tree, but thank goodness he's back in the trees now. But so I'd go as far to say, well, in a stationary system, if we're using a basal anchor, you should never isolate it unless there's a very specific reason why. So that leads into a bunch of different things, like the forces that can be created by using stationary rope compared to a double rope, and then how we can mitigate that, and that sort of thing. So is that where we're going to go with this right now? Do we want to jump right into that? So yeah, accessing a tree would be one reason that, one of the first reasons that we started using a stationary rope. And this isn't a new concept, it's new to tree work, but cavers have been using it for a long, long time, and even beyond that. So, yeah, we want to go into this. Go ahead.
Yeah, one more thing. If you swear by doubled rope systems, you could get a throw line over a difficult tree. You could get a throw liner over a bunch of good forks, crotches, bring it down and base tie it, but you could tie in your double rope system onto that. So if this was the line I've just pulled up with the throw line, you could put, it's best to put a mailon, which is a lockable connector like that, rather than a carabiner, because carabiners, remote carabiners, you can find that the gate starts rubbing against the tree and maybe even opens. But you could fit something like that in there with a pulley in there, a decent rated pulley. You could pull that whole system up on your doubled system, tied through that pulley and base tie it. So you've got a doubled system you've just pulled up. But yeah, worth bearing in mind the additional force you will give to that anchor point by having a pulley effect on the anchor point. It usually doesn't get as high as double because of friction and everything else, but it's going to be a lot more than it being chokered at that point on a normal static line. So yeah, that's another method, and a lot of these things usually would be used because it's just too difficult to conventionally go up a tree, and it assumes that spiking's out of the question. Because when it comes to getting up a tree quick, spikes often are pretty quick. But if you're saving the tree and it's just a pruning job, and there's no branches and everything's hideous for every other reason, I'm going straight for the throw line, and that's going to be a great way in.
All right, so we have a couple lines already set. So I'm going to start going into basal anchors and the options that we have with them, starting at the most simplest, moving up from there, why we would choose them, pros and cons of each system. So, yeah, we have a number of ropes. We got one way. And so we got a number of ropes set here, and I'll go ahead and start showing different options on how to use this. So one of the other reasons that I use stationary rope system is that I only have to add as much rope into the system as I'm going to need. So with this, I could anchor off on this side, but then I have, this is a 200-foot line, so I have maybe, say, an extra 100 foot sitting here on the ground. That's going to be a lot of rope to manipulate around the tree. Unless I have a specific plan for it, I really don't want that. But to start with the most basic of basal anchors, we'll just start with a running bowline and show a couple options off of that. So I'll go ahead and start tying that up. So, yeah, this isn't going to work. Not even worth giving it a shot.
So fairly simple running bowline. Always back up your bowlines for PPE, what we call PPE stuff, which is any time life support comes into play. So he's tying a bowline there, chokered, and he's going to back it up probably with a Yosemite tile. Very nice. And now he's going to want to choker that up. He's tying also an alpine butterfly above that, and that's going to be a point for rescue if that's needed. Also, by rotating that chokered running bowline there, when somebody has the need to come along and use that alpine as a rescue point, they can give weight to that and then slide that background underneath, and suddenly there's a whole load of slack that they can use. So this alpine needs to be set within reach, so if you're a bit short, your groundsman's not too tall, it's going to be no good if you can't reach that, he or she. So yeah, get some weight into that by pulling down on it, usually by putting a harness on yourself or setting up a basal system that you're going to use for lowering someone if you need to, but put some weight in that. It takes enough weight off to then be able to slide that. I only got 2 arms. Slide that along and then pop the knots on that to undo it, and then you can start using that as a lowering point. Obviously not rope on rope, because you might only get halfway and then it burns through it. So put a carabiner or something in there, or yeah, something solid. You'll also need to make sure it's not going to run through any tight forks if you're sending a lump of rope like that up there. But typically a climber will be in a position where there's enough rope to get them to the ground before that reaches the very top of the tree and the fork that it's through. So that is a standard way to set the alpine above as a rescue point.
Yes, so that also goes into one of the advantages of a stationary system like this is that you can set up a system that can be able to be lowering a climber out of the tree in the case of an emergency. Now, along with that, I always like to say that I don't see a ton of scenarios that we would use a basal anchor to rescue somebody. So there's a couple of scenarios that, in my mind, it's an excellent option, and a couple of scenarios where it's not a very good option. So to touch on that briefly, if a climber's in ascent and runs into, say, bees, and he's allergic and needs to come down quickly but can't lower himself, an excellent time to have a basal anchor and be able to lower him down. If someone was to pass out for exhaustion, maybe it's their 13th, 14th tree of the day, and they're just fatigued on a hot, humid day, and they suddenly run out of energy on the way up, cramp up, or something like that, that's an excellent option. But I think it's an overused concept to assume that we can always lower someone out of the tree, because if the cut's being made, they should be lanyarded in, and then we're opening up to an even more dangerous situation by taking away their life support there, when they should be lanyarded in and they won't be able to be lowered to the ground. Also, if an injury is had where you could create a further injury or multiply injuries by trying to lower them down without knowing what's going on at the climber. So most of the time, we're always going to want to access and assess what's going on with the climber before just trying to jump right into a basal anchor and lower them down. But because of the option because of the options that they present, I think it's always important that we add something like that. And that's really not hard. It takes no extra gear, and it's an excellent set way to, they would say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, yeah, that. Don't use that. So that's the most basic. You want to go ahead and show the one you showed me earlier? So sometimes you run into a really large tree, it's like a beech with a big flare or something. And even a running bowline like that is going to want a tendency to slide up, where then we're not going to be able to reach that alpine butterfly if we need it, or it's not ideal to have something sliding up like that. So this is a technique that he uses, and he showed me this morning, and it works really well. Let me get this other rope better. So what he's going to do here is he's going around the tree in the same original fashion. Then he's going to pass through and come back around, creating a bite on that. And then he's going to go back and again use that running bowline. Tie it off on the stationary side again. And what this enables is to lock down much better. It creates a much firmer hold, much secure hold on the base of a tree. So if we do have that bigger root flare, that this doesn't have quite a tendency to go up. And he pointed out that it works a lot better on smooth bark trees, which is another area that it might want to run up a tree, say a beech or a sycamore or something like that, that has real smooth bark, is a little bit easier to set by this. So what he's going to do is he's going to just start working it back and forth a little bit, and it's going to cinch up real nice and tight, as you can see there, and almost locks in. So one of the advantages of this, and when we're looking at these basal anchors, we have a couple of tests. It's called the flap factor and the whistle test. And so what the flap factor is when slack's introduced into the system, what happens here? How much slop is it coming down and up? As we introduce mechanics into this, that becomes a real big concern on how they're loading or how they're interfacing with the tree here. So in this system, even if you were to slack, your basal anchor isn't slacking at all because it's been cinched up so nice and tight. So that's a real big advantage. But as you said before, if we added an alpine butterfly into this and you slacked it, this can easily pop off by just giving this running bowline a little flip. And even cinched really tight, it'll just pop open. And then we can untie that and again go into a scenario where if we need to, we could lower somebody to the ground. So again, a basic, no equipment added. Anybody can do this with the equipment that they have. They're using a rope. And so an excellent second option to just a simple running bowline. So is there any questions with that before we keep moving on? Oh, sweet. We're killing it, right? No questions. We covered everything. All right. We'll move right on into, I'll show one that I've been using a lot. So as I said, one of the advantages of using a basal anchor is that we only have to put as much rope into the system as we want. And I really enjoy incorporating rings because they can be loaded in any direction. So it's really hard to use a ring in a situation where you misload it or have bad interfacing. So I'll just set that up real quick so we can see it as we progress. So let's see if I can get this one. So I'm just going to incorporate a ring into this. So we got the amount of rope that I think I'm going to need in this side over here. And this isn't totally adjustable, so I think it's important to add a little bit more than I think I'm going to add, because the worst case scenario is that you run out of rope when you don't need to. So I'm just going to pass a bite around the tree. And I'm going to slide that initially on the rope. Take a little walk. Now I'm going to tie a figure 8. I like the figure 8 because it's the strongest knot. Simple figure 8. I'm going to pass the eye of that 8 through the ring and clip it. So it's the same concept as the running bowline. And then I'm going to use a alpine butterfly up here. Create our options. So now I have maybe an extra 100 feet on the ground here, but I only have to use as much rope as I needed, and that just stays. You can leave it in a bag or something like that so it's out of the way when working. And I only need this much rope in the system, so I don't have to manage. Say I've got a 200-foot rope like this, but I'm doing a 50-foot tree. I only need to put 100 foot into the system, 120 foot in the system. I don't have to use all 200 foot of rope. And to me, that's a big advantage because I get into a lot of smaller trees, but I don't want to be carrying 4 lines everywhere with me. I don't want to carry 100-foot line, 200-foot line, 150. You know, I just want one rope that I can use through a bunch of different scenarios. So that's probably the most basic setup that I use for that sort of thing. To add rope into the system, that's going to be kind of hard. So we can progress from there into using like a mechanical type device, or setting up a separate basal anchor. Where with all of these, we've used the rope itself to create our basal anchor. The other option is using a specific sling, such as a snake bite. If you want to go ahead and just set that up real quick, is an excellent option as well. So with this, we have a separate sling. It can be, like this is a very specific one for this purpose, and it's really quick to set up with a lot of safety factors put into it as well. So the snake bite's designed in a way that each one of these stitchings will pop, so it's sort of like a decelerator as well. If anybody does rock climbing, they might be familiar with that sort of concept. So this allows you to put just as much rope into the system as well, and then start incorporating a lowering device. Where before we're using the alpine butterfly to create a lowerable option, now we can create a lowerable option right in the basal anchor itself. So what's your preferred basal anchor system? Who uses a separate basal anchor? Anybody? What kind of system do you go to? Okay. Yeah. So you use a figure 8 and then not backed up, connected to a separate carabiner that would be loaded. So yeah. So then you just release the knot out of the carabiner, untie, and you'd be able to lower them out on the 8 itself. Do you back that up at all with a hitch or a prusik?
No, I don't. I just put a couple of
okay.
half hitches, but
Yeah. Yeah. So that way it's locked off itself. Right. So that's a very simple system. When I said about a whistle test and a flop factor, so the whistle test is if someone was blew a whistle when you're lowering them, could you let go and the climber be safe? Would that pass a whistle test? If you let go of the end of the line, the climber would come to the ground. Hopefully slow because he's on a descent device. But the other thing about that is, have you tested that with all your climbers? Yeah, okay, that's all perfect. Any of these lowerable options you want to go over, because the last thing you want to do is in an emergency situation be using it for the first time. I can tell you, I used to set up that figure 8, and I had my wife at the time try to lower me out, and there was too much friction there. It was a rough bark tree, so she let go of the rope, and I went nowhere. Okay, nice. So what are the other options you guys use for a basal anchor? Any other options other than a figure 8 there? Back to the whistle test is if you were to incorporate a prusik above that, is that at any time you could let go and that prusik's going to catch at the same time. So a simple extra step to create an extra safety factor in that system. Or below. Or below, like when we foot lock, we have it above, you can put it below as well, and then you can use the prusik to open up and release it. Arch, you had another system. What do you use? The D4? A specific descent device for that. I have the Petzl rig with me. I'll set that up as well. Go ahead. You can untie my mess there and show whatever you'd like to show there. So yeah, the D4 or the Petzl rig are specific devices used for descent. They can also be used in work positioning. But the really nice thing about that is, has anybody used a figure 8 for lowering? I know I have. I did it a lot. So the one concern I have about using a figure 8 is that if someone walks up to the tree and you told them to lower something out, and they had a long night the day before or something like that, they could potentially release your climbing system, thinking that they're going to be lowering a piece. I had a really bad day one time, and my boss was up in the tree. I had a long night, had like 2 hours of sleep, came in, and he's like, all right, piece is tied off, go ahead and grab the lowering line. And I walked back, and I said, yeah, I'm all set. Put his line through the porter wrap, and he's like, look at what you're holding. I looked down, I had his climbing line run through the lowering device. It was a mistake, but it showed the mental capacity I had at the time. We actually walked off the job because of it. A really bad day for me. But so my point being is that when incorporating a lowering device, I find it very important to incorporate a device that we wouldn't use in a rigging scenario. One, so that we're not incorporating something we've used for rigging into a climbing scenario, or vice versa, or that someone doesn't walk up and accidentally release the wrong system. Just food for thought. If you've got your guys well trained on that system, it can be an excellent system as well. So what I'm going back to, Archie, is that a D4 or a rig is very specific to climbing. So it's going to be hard for someone to walk up to that and accidentally release it thinking that they're lowering a piece out of the tree. So another one I've heard is the mini porter wrap, and it's a great device for lowering and stuff like that, but that's where I'd really run into, where a figure 8 probably isn't commonly used anymore for rigging, so that's probably a good go-to. But a mini porter wrap I do use for rigging. So it might be very quick for one of my guys, if we have multiple lines set up, to walk up and release my climbing system if I'm tied off to a porter wrap, a mini porter wrap, instead of the actual line. Everybody follow why I'm talking about that? So yeah, all right. So yeah, here we go. He has the snake bite, and it's very simple. The end passes through a ring, and then you attach a carabiner. There's multiple attachment points here, as tight as possible to the tree. And I'm going to set a rig up to show how we use a device like that. So yeah, very simple. Excellent choice.
Did anyone notice we haven't mentioned knives yet? And cutting ropes? Well, that's intentional, because hands up who wants a panicking groundsman running at the base tie with a sharp knife in their hand. Not very cool. And if they cut the wrong bit, they just panic. They just, oh yeah, I forgot to tie in that bit. Oh dear. Not clever. So knives and ropes, absolute last resort. Double check. You know what you're about to do with it. Stop and think. Don't just rush in with a knife.
All right, so where he used the snake anchor and he was able to just clip in to get it as close to the tree as possible, I'm using Teufelberger's multi-sling here, and I have a pressic on it, and to make sure that I take as much slop out of the system as possible, I'm going to preset it, and then I'm going to take and tend it as much as possible. And I'm going to set up a stopper knot behind it, just in case this was to release. And I'll show you two ways of setting it up, and one's this system's much better than the opposite way, where you could run the ring through the eye of the prusik. The reason being is I've seen that done before. We were down in Georgia working on some really tall pine trees, and a guy did that, and the bark was really rough, and as he went up, it tended the prusik. And so by the time he stopped, luckily he had a stopper knot on the end. His whole lowerable system was 10 to 15 feet in the air because that prusik had tended. So it's always important, no matter what, to put that stopper knot behind. And then I always recommend running the prusik through the ring, because that's going to pull the prusik into the tree instead of having that possibility of pulling it around where it could accidentally tend. So talking about the flop factor, the reason I want that as tight as possible is because if this system's slacked, this is going to drop. So how much slop is happening in that? If I have it out the whole way like this, it can still cinch up, but there's a lot of slop in this here, where I've got a mechanical device that's banging around on the tree and could potentially become misloaded. So I'm going to pull that tight, cinch it up, and use a stopper knot behind it. Now another thing I did was I used the girth hitch here, and that's to prevent accidentally side loading a carabiner. I could just run it through the eye and try to pull it tight, but chances are there's going to be a little bit of sit back in the system where I don't want it to potentially slack and then end up loading the carabiner sideways, or even worse, on the gate. So that's why I use a girth hitch to keep the interfacing proper. So I'm going to go ahead and use the D4. Open it up, or no, that's the rig.
Shall I have a quick man about side loading carabiners? Because I like doing that. You see a lot of people rigging with carabiners as well. If I was to hand you a carabiner and say break that, the first thing you'd probably do is grab both sides like that and put it over your knee and just generally abuse it by trying to bend it across that axis. So these things are tested end to end like that, and that's where the safety rating comes from. You may not break the gate when you're rigging on it, but you may mess the gate up enough so that the next time it goes up for someone to use it, the thing doesn't open anymore. But diligently, you check your carabiners before you use them every time, and make sure that they snap shut, auto lock, and go to the locked position. And there's a test you can look up. The DMM, they have a test on their site, but it's to open it up fully, make sure it shuts, open it up, just part way away from the nose of the gate there, make sure it shuts, and then I like to see if I can stop it on the gate, because I'm pedantic. And that shuts and that works nice. It also has the locking feature in that first way, that first direction, it won't open. I've got to physically move it and twist it to do that. Also checking symmetry, wear and tear, big scratches. You've been zip lining with it for weeks. All of that stuff suddenly makes this not a carabiner you want to use for climbing anymore. So check your gear.
So here I've set up with the rig, and this is a great device for lowering. There's a couple of things to note when setting this up. One is that the handle's on the outside, away from the tree. So if, when lowering, which is putting it in that position, that it accidentally doesn't contact the tree and stay open like that, because this will automatically go back to a closed position. And then it also has a locked position. So when we're using it, we want to have it in a locked position there. Now, we also want to back that up, because if this saw an extreme load, it could slip a little bit. I've seen guys put alpine butterflies back here, which is an option. One of the concerns I have is if this was to slip and jam into there, how do you untie it to be able to lower someone down? So I prefer to use like a muncher mule backup. So I'll take a twist, pass a bite around and through, cinch that up, and that's like a slip knot, can just be pulled and released. And then on top of it, I'm going to put another half hitch, and then I like redundancies, so I would take the carabiner and clip this back to something else as well. So that way it's fully backed up, locked off, and now we can go ahead and climb. And this is the flop factor really comes into play when using these mechanical devices on how much movement there is when you're slacking a system. So this would pass the whistle test as well, because if you were to let go when descending, it flips back into that auto lock position. So it's a good option. Now, one of the things with these is, let's say it is a bee thing, is you're stuck here at the base of the tree lowering as well. So a guy comes down, bees chasing him, now all of a sudden they're chasing you as well. And you're both in trouble. But, you know, not every scenario is perfect. So, all right, so that's basically the basal anchor part of it. Does anybody use something separate than what we've shown here, drastically different? Or a different device that they really like?
Do truck wraps with a inline ball. I do 3 wraps. Doesn't pass the whistle test, so you're saying, but I do a minimal of 3 wraps.
Yeah.
And then do an inline ball and over.
Yeah, so that's a very viable option. Going back to trunk wraps, thinking a couple wraps around, and then attach it off to the standing part of the line here. Yeah. Again, knowing that it doesn't pass the whistle test in that scenario. And also, if you take 3 trunk wraps, have you ever tried lowering somebody on that?
No, but I mean, I know there's part of the beauty of it is if I were to do something, those 3 wraps should hold me, and the bowline is there.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you've got enough friction in the system there that it's not going anywhere, even if the running bowline somehow became undone. The downside to that is if you do have to go to lower someone down, 3 wraps is probably going to be much more than needed. So now all of a sudden you're trying to take 3 wraps off of rope to try to lower them, and that's going to take you to passing the whole rope around. But yeah, so you know the pluses and minuses with every system. Every system's going to have pros and cons. Not one's going to be perfect for every scenario, all the way around, and that goes for everything. So let's keep moving from that. If there's no questions with it, good, we're flowing. All right. tree. So I guess we can move into the types of systems that we use. So there's a number of different stationary rope systems. I don't think we're going to touch too much on the moving rope systems unless someone has a couple questions on that, or everybody has a question on that. But I think most of us probably already know the standard moving rope systems or doubled rope systems that we use. Sort of the rope wrench. So the rope wrench was the start of it, of a viable stationary rope system to be used. So we'll show that, and there's some intricacies to know with it in terms of interfacing and setup and all that to go over. So let's go over that. You already have one set up? All right. So the beauty of the rope wrench is that it uses everything that we're already familiar with and just adds one piece of equipment. So we have a climbing knot here. We have our climbing knot here, and it can be the mic. And it one's good. All right, so we have our regular climbing knot here, and we can use any knot that is traditionally used in a moving rope system as long as it passes one test that I'll show. You should be able, that has to be able to grab on a stationary rope with the rope wrench off. That's your life support. Your hitch is your life support. So this has to be able to grab at all times with or without the rope wrench on. So then to create this a stationary system, it adds the rope wrench. But the rope wrench is a very simple device. When going up, it flips into a neutral position and it contends simply. And then when coming down, it takes a bite. So let's go ahead and tie it on something. All right, so yeah, the rope wrench is extremely, it works, and it kind of works off the principle of a doubled rope system. So when going up, your hitch tends, and the rope wrench flips into the neutral position, so it just tends as it goes up. When coming down, it's going to take a bend of the rope, and this is figured out to be about 180 degrees, which is the same kind of bend that your rope takes passing over a friction saver or a limb. 180 degree bend to come back to you. So it takes about the same amount of force too. In a double rope system, your hitch sees half the amount of weight because you've got two parts of line attached to you. The rope wrench is found to take about 55% of the climber's weight off the knot. So your knot's going to react very similar. The one test that I always require my guys to do is to take the rope wrench off, and we're going to make sure with some pressure underneath that this goes up and grabs. Because when we're going up in an ascent system, we're going to have either foot ascenders. When we're going up in an ascent system, we're either going to be using foot ascenders, foot locking, and this is going to be tensioned underneath. And that's going to change the way your hitch reacts than a loose rope. It might be easier for the grab on that, but we create tension underneath that this will stop reacting. So this is a test that I make all my guys do before climbing with this, is that make sure you're not, with pressure underneath, can go up and grab. And then we can now install the rope wrench and go to work. So this is a great option to just use your doubled rope system, adding a single component that's turned it into a stationary system. And when we were talking before, one of the advantages is that all your friction management is right here, and you can see that, and the rope's not moving, your system's moving along the rope. So this manages the friction in this little bit right here.
This would be a good point to test the anchor point. You can do a bounce test, single climber bounce test, and you'll notice he's keeping on his feet, because if you do rip out that anchor point and you're lying on the ground, having just snapped it out, you don't want then to have it falling on you and hitting you. So do it in a way that you can bounce on it, and that if it does snap, you're on your feet and you're running. 2 people also can do a pull test. That's not a bounce test. 2 people just literally load the rope and both give it their full weight, and that's the second test to secure an anchor point. But have a good look at the tree anyway. Look for abnormalities, dead bits, anything that looks wrong, and make a good judgment on your anchor point. It's a long way away. There's no shame in buying a pair of binoculars. Do we call them that? Yeah. Yeah, get a set of those, and also helps to see what you've actually got your line up and over, because you can have a real fat crotch up there, and you think the rope's going over that, but actually it's over a dead stub 3 feet above it, and that's no good. But you'll find all that out when you do the bounce test. If not, maybe once you're getting a bit closer to it, yeah, suddenly you'll fall. We work in work positioning harnesses. Most of these harnesses are not for falling in. The Teufelberger's tree motion has it written in there. 600 millimeters is the distance you're allowed to fall. That's not a long way to fall in a harness. But because these are work position harnesses, they're not for falling in. So as a result, we don't climb above anchor points, because if you do, you've got to double up the height you've gone above your anchor point. And also with double rope systems, as you're humping your way up the tree, we don't have too much slack in the system. So don't go pulling 7 big tugs of rope and having a huge bow of rope there. If you miss a grab and fall on that, you're going a long way down before that rope goes tight and you get a pretty nasty shock load. So a couple of tugs, tend to slack out. You can add a foot ascender onto that if that makes you happier. A great way to tend to slack.
So another thing to note with the rope wrench is that when you're descending, there should always be about a fist's width between your hitch and the pulley when the rope wrench when activated. So he runs a fairly small hitch here, which is great. I run mine a little bit longer, but I'm always going to make sure in that descent mode that I can stick the fist in there between the hitch and the rope wrench itself. And that prevents, when going neutral, the rope wrench sitting on top of your hitch and accidentally tending that if you were to sit back in and this hasn't engaged yet. So another thing that's been incorporated in this, and is incorporated in the most tethers now, is that it has a bandit here or something there to push the rope wrench up to initiate that engagement before coming into descent. But yeah, I would stress that as well, is that we should always have a fist's width between your hitch and the rope wrench itself. So that's the simplest, and if you're looking to first get into stationary rope, it's always the one that I'd suggest. One, it's not as expensive as some of the other options, and you're also working with a hitch that you're already familiar with. So then moving right along, we got a rope runner, which is moving towards the fully mechanical side of things. So this can be put on midline attachable. I'll be honest in that I very rarely do. I often just slide it on the end of my line. So I'll go ahead and do that so you can show how this is set up. But basically, I'm going to take the rope for the top piece, and they have arrows marking how to use it, and then it's going to come down along this friction plate and through the pulley there.
Yeah, it's not much fun to reset this thing up in the tree and take it all apart. But rope runner 2, anyone, please do, is more a complete unit, which the bits aren't going to fall away separate from each other. Easy to chuck it over the end sometimes.
Yeah. So this is the setup of the rope runner. It's fully mechanical, where it is a little bit more of a compact system. It plays off of a couple of principles that at the bottom. So it plays off a couple principles. The bottom pulley is movable, so it'll create a pinch point at the bottom. The top of this black-blue lever will lever into the top, creating a pinch there as well. And then the top acts as a mini rope wrench where it takes a bend. So this is going to be used by releasing what they call the bird to allow it to come down. and being that it's mechanical, it tends a little bit better, smoother, and then with some practice can be released really smoothly as well. So this is the device I use most typically at work now. I jump back and forth quite a bit between the rope wrench and the rope runner, and then there's other viable options as well with the akimbo coming out soon and such. Now, one thing I see quite often, and I'm not going to show it because I don't really promote it, because it's not the specs, is I see guys using the zigzag, which is a common tool for doubled rope, but then adding a rope wrench onto it. And I just don't recommend it because, one, neither Petzl or IFC approves that, and then two, it misconfigures the way you're loading the zigzag. So I just say, just as a general rule of thumb, to shy away from that.
Yeah, I'm going to have a moan about this because it's something I do on Instagram a lot. It's been tested through these different ways. So these links here are tested, and this attachment hole is tested, and that's how it's given its rating. It's not necessarily been tested on just the links. And the problem with the rope wrench is that it's not fine-tuned to grab at the same rate that these links grab. So it may not engage fully, the rope wrench that is, and you may end up, if you shock load this, if you take a fall on it, you may end up on your super static line really heavily loading these links, which is not a good idea. When might you do that? Well, if you're on a spar, cutting a spar down, you've got your lanyard around, you're taking your bit off, you've got someone filming it, it's all looking great, feeling pretty pleased with yourself, but you cut through your lanyard and you've got your zigzag and rope wrench set up beneath you, maybe somewhere around your knees as a backup, where if you cut through your lanyard, you potentially have got a factor 2 fall there, depending how far above your system you are, and by the time it grabs, you may have fallen like 7-8 feet or something. But that's a hell of a shock for your system and for the zigzag. And it's not been tested like that, it's not been rated for that. So if you have an accident and you're looking to sue someone, that's not going to happen because you did something silly. So just bear it in mind what you're doing to these things, how you're using them. I check equipment for a living, and what I see a lot is inside here there's an internal flare in there where these links can move backwards and forwards, pivoting on that axle there with this pulley. And often I see with people who've been SRTing on a zigzag that there's damage at this end of that flare, and that means that these links have been it's been orientated upward like that because that attachment hole's not been in play, and so what's happening? Well, that means that these bottom links are levering against the body of the device and onto that axle. And again, if I said break that, the first thing you'd do is probably push real hard on there and see if you could, with leverage, damage that. So I just think, yeah, it works, it's super smooth, it's great on SRT, there's probably one set up somewhere, but it's really naughty.
Going how bothered is he say that accent.
All right. So was there any? Turn this off really fast. Is there any other systems that any of you guys use out there? I'm not familiar with any others. I've heard of the Bulldog Bone and such like that. I've never played with it. It's not a manufactured sort of device, so you're going to be doing that at your own risk. But is there any other systems anybody use? Yeah, go ahead.
Hitchhiker too. The hitchhiker.
Oh, the hitchhiker. Yeah, honestly, I completely forgot about that one. But yeah, so that actually incorporates some of the same concepts as the bottom. It works on 2 pinch plates with a bone through the top and a steel carabiner through the bottom.